Let's lay it right on the line. Bigotry and racism are among the deadliest social ills plaguing the world today. But unlike a team of costume supervillains, they can't be halted with a punch in the snoot or a zap from a ray gun. The only way to destroy them is to expose them, to reveal them for the insidious evils they really are. That was a quote from Stan Lee in 1968. The arts have always been a way to highlight and provide commentary on social issues. So here on Creative Controversy, we discuss works we think did just that. Because if you're going to create, you might as well create some controversy. Hello everyone, my name is Summer Steele, and today's episode will be about graphic novels. Now, for today's episode, I need everyone to remember that the original text and the movie or TV reproduction of these graphic novels are not the same. Most of the characters have been changed or softened. The villains have been changed or softened because they didn't feel that the original form from these texts was acceptable for children. So I think to really understand the history of social commentary in like the comic and graphic novel community, we kind of have to start at the beginning a little bit, which would take us back to 1933 with the very first graphic novel, which was Superman. When Superman came out, there had been newspaper comics, but there had never been a graphic novel as we understand them to be today. And to understand Superman, you have to understand what was going on in the country at the time. So in 1933 was the Great Depression, which was caused by a weak banking system, a collapse in farm prices, industrial overproduction. All of these things were happening as a result of big corporations or big systems that were out of the control of the everyday people of our country. As a result, we have Superman, who is the epitome of good. During a time when our whole country had been let down, basically, by these bigger systems, and they were very much suffering, we then get this hero who is fighting for the little guy. Superman strives to represent compassion and responsibility and the inherent goodness of the human spirit and the capacity of every living thing to do right by their neighbors. And then we look at Superman's nemesis, Lex Luthor, a billionaire owner of LexCorp. He's always trying to take over the world. He's always making these decisions out of greed that are hurting the people. And then we have Superman protecting the people. And that's really just the beginning. Shortly after that, in 1939, came Batman. Batman is so interesting because all of his villains represent various mental illnesses. That's why when Batman defeats them, he sends them to Arkham Asylum, whereas Superman sends his villains to Stryker's Island Penitentiary. Mental illness wasn't something that was super understood back then. In the 30s and 40s, people were just being sent to the asylum literally for nothing. Women would be called hysterical and get sent to the asylum. There is no way out of the asylum back then, except to break out or to die. They didn't really believe people were cured. They meted them up. They did shock therapy. They did lobotomies and the hot and cold water torture. They didn't call it torture. They called it treatments. In that time, there was also the emergence of more of a collective desire to understand the human psyche more. And Batman is that darkness within all of us. And it's not just PTSD or schizophrenia. There are the more extreme mental illnesses, yes, but there is also that focus on motivation and the motivation behind people's actions, which everyone could learn from. His most famous nemesis is, of course, the Joker, who represents a host of issues. We have borderline personality disorder, psychosis, OCD, pathological lying, and a much less known pseudobulbar effect, which is characterized by random bouts of uncontrollable laughter or crying. Then we have his famous lady and partner in crime, Harley Quinn. She's an example of Stockholm syndrome, for sure. Histrionic personality disorder, the extreme need for attention that manifests in all sorts of ways, whether they're sexual or violent, or with Harley's case, both. She also represents shared psychotic disorder with the Joker, where two or more people in a close relationship share a common delusion. The Penguin, he represents narcissism. We have Catwoman. She represents kleptomania and antisocial personality disorder. We have Mad Hatter. First off, he's a pedophile and he's also schizophrenic. We have the Black Mask. He has sadistic personality disorder. He just likes to torture people. He gets off on their pain. He's a sadist. We have Two-Face. His is often the one that people think of first because he's kind of the most obvious, as far as the representation. He literally has his two sides to him, which is representative of dissociative identity disorder as well as bipolar. And he also, in understanding his story, represents PTSD, which a lot of men at the time were very much struggling with. We could go on forever. They all represent the internal struggles that we face every single day just trying to survive our everyday lives. But what makes Batman so interesting is that he's actually a psychopath himself. His motivation, and something that they focus on a lot in Batman, is his need for violence. He is in himself just as violent as all of his villains. He just uses it to fight villains instead of harming the people of the city. Batman, Dexter, Sherlock Holmes, they're all examples of this anti-hero archetype. They are psychopaths driven by a need for violence and bloodshed and to hurt people as they were once hurt as babies, except for they channel it to protecting people instead of hurting them. After Batman, we saw Captain America in 1941. That is when America joined World War II. A time in which insane, greedy men like Hitler and Mussolini, Lenin, Stalin, Hirohito, etc. were trying to take over the world. They all worked together and they were insane. Young men all across the country were being drafted and shipped across the seas to fight in this horrific and brutal war. And Captain America represented honor, courage, perseverance. He inspired the patriotism that people needed to get through this war and the fire to fight, but not for gain or for empire, just to fight for the people, fight for each other, fight for the people that were being hurt, across seas in Europe. Then, a couple decades later, in 1963, came X-Men. X-Men is still to this day considered to be Stan Lee's most outrightly political graphic novel. In X-Men, we see a group of people. They are the other. They were born different. And as a result, the country has been divided because so many people are afraid of what those differences might mean that they let that fear turn into hate. The X-Men represent the civil rights war being fought here in America. The X-Men are a group of mutant teenagers led by Professor Xavier Charles, and they represent the insane fear that people have of the other. And what's most interesting is that they fight to protect the very same people that hate them and want to see them killed. Professor X, he is a very wise leader. He strives for harmonious coexistence and believes that humans and mutants can come together. This was Stan Lee's representation of Martin Luther King Jr. He strived to bring people together through peace. Then we have Magneto. He had a much more rigid attitude toward the protection of mutants, and he wasn't necessarily as hopeful that the humans and mutants would be able to come together peacefully. Though often painted as a villain, he is actually just fiercely protective over his people. He was Stan Lee's representation of Malcolm X. He understood that when dealing with violent individuals, sometimes you must fight with violence. I think that in this violent time, violent means were necessary. And so this villainous portrayal is wrong. And with Magneto, it's the same thing. He's not bad. He's just willing to fight to protect the mutants. Then in 1966 came Black Panther, which I'm sure we all know the story of, and so on, and it continues. As a result, of their commentary on society and politics. They were blamed for corrupting the morals of young people all over the country. It was said that graphic novels would be the downfall of America. Not all graphic novels are fictitious tales of superheroes and villains. I think that they are very important stories to read because I feel like as Americans, we often forget that we can lose these rights, that they can be taken from us, that if we're not careful, we can give all the power to the wrong people. If you haven't ever really checked out graphic novels or read any, I think definitely should. Any of the ones I've talked about today would be great, or I would also recommend checking out Watchmen or Sandman. So thank you all for listening to Creative Controversy. My name is Summer Steele. Remember, if you're going to create, you might as well create some controversy.